Today, Jasper Johns is one of America's great painters. He's 84 and at the summit of his career. His beginnings, however, were long ago. He was born in 1930 in Georgia. He was the child of a broken home, which meant a very disrupted childhood. His education was messy at best. Eventually, he went to war. America was fighting with Korea, and spent his service years in Japan. After the war, he made a beeline to New York, having decided he would try to be an artist. He went to design school briefly, but then set himself out on the career that we know him for today. Inspiration is a curious word when it comes to Jasper Johns, simply because the things he chooses to paint don't, on the face of themselves, look inspired. He paints numbers and letters and targets, and then notoriously the American flag. These have in common the fact that they are all conventional. They're easily recognized. They're schemes, he said, that allow the mind to work on different levels. The answer lies in his attraction to convention, his notion that if he worked with what he called things the mind already knows, then he would be free to work on other levels. For him, there was one level beneath the convention that was depth. Describing flag is a more complicated process than you would imagine. Everyone recognizes this insignia, this deeply conventional insignia that is the American flag, red, white, and blue. But painting it for Johns was a much more complex process than we could ever have anticipated. For one thing, he didn't use paint on canvas. Instead, he turned to encaustic, which is a deeply traditional way of painting. It's painting with wax, and it goes back at least to ancient Egypt. When Johns used it, he took his candle wax, melted it, and then floated pigment into it, red, white, and blue. So imagine 3 cans of different colored wax, hot, and kept hot in order to be applied to the canvas. But now imagine not brushes doing the process of application, but instead the artist's own fingers or small tools like palette knives, and using those tools to dip in torn bits of the daily papers, red, white, and blue each time, saturating a piece of newsprint with this hot medium and then pressing it carefully on to the canvas. And I do mean carefully. If you look at the surface of the final picture, that you can see how precisely these applied bits of color and newsprint adhere to the flag pattern. The stars are raised, the edges between the red and the white are precisely observed. The pattern holds true, but then look beneath and into the wax as it hardens, and you will see the traces of the newsprint of which this work is constructed. The question of what flag represents seems transparent on one level. The flag is the flag. The flag is always the flag. It's a deeply conventional and for many people cherished, for others resented symbol of the American state. It's also a painting. And this, for viewers from the very moment of its creation, produces a problem. Is it a flag or a painting? And how can we mentally accommodate this apparent paradox that it is both? Now, the fact that he made the painting a flag and made the flag a painting, and then made that flag painting out of the stuff of ordinary life, suggests to me that he was trying as best he could, and I think it's a pretty good try, to constitute the painted flag as an absolutely inclusive sign, to make it full of the dailiness, the everydayness, the ordinariness of life. The American flag is such a complex symbol. It seems straightforward, but behind it in the 1950s stood a complicated and varied social world. Perhaps the first thing to say about that world is that it was marked by the transformations in social life and experience that resulted from a new prosperity that resulted in an unprecedented level of consumerism and conformity. The early 1950s marked the beginning of the American civil rights movement as we know it today. This is the great moment of the integration of schools in the American South. Equal rights were enshrined at the heart of American law, and the schools were desegregated under very difficult conditions. Difficult for the children involved, above all. Imagine going to school with policemen and dogs clearing the streets while you were being taunted as names called as you tried to make your way to your classroom every day. Finally, in this complex landscape, consider the Red Scare of communism as it began to infect American life during those years. But in the post-war years, it became a kind of scare and a cause of an American senator, Joseph McCarthy, who began to investigate major figures within the US establishment, particularly in the entertainment industry. Names were named, lists were kept of who the communists were. And if your name appeared on such a list, you were called before the Senate, you were investigated, your memberships were scrutinized, and you could lose your job. You could never work again. And this happened to many of the most important figures on the American cultural scene. Flag inevitably speaks to Americans. The flag does, it's our national symbol, and it is can be both an inspiration and also a burden. To be conscious of what is done in the name of the flag is to be conscious of the quite complex and shaping influence that America has had on the rest of the world. I say complex and shaping. Those words are not adequate, really, to the military involvement which America has taken upon itself for decades, really. America has waged war, a continuous war, for a century, I would say. My own interest in what the flag stands for, both sort of peace, and also war, I suppose. It was in 2003, in the spring of that year, when America undertook a violent, an explosive, a shocking and awing campaign of bombing against Iraq. It was a moment in which citizens had to think about what their country was doing and how their own relationship to the nation could be understood. What does it mean for your country to be killing civilians, for example, to be conducting such an explosive and indeed media attracting campaign of devastation? Over the years, flag has come to mean quite a bit to me. When I first became passionately interested in it, it stood for me as one major image in the history of American art, a kind of summation of Americanness, if you will, that allowed me to think about my own relationship to the country as an art historian. It seems somehow impossible that one could think that your own small self and the nation, or your own small professional self and the nation, could go together. But every now and again, there are circumstances, there are political and social, domestic circumstances that call up questions like this. I think they're urgent for everyone to take seriously, but as a teacher, I felt it necessary to ask this question in an immediate and practical way. And it, in fact, emerged from my teaching that the question came up for me. What does it mean to be an American who is also an art historian?